Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the SafeHouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the SafeHouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Many of you have probably heard the term NIST. Well, that's what it stands for. And the thing about organizations like NIST, which is about 120 some years old at this point, it's critical part of our current modern society. And what's more important is that what breathes life into NIST is the leadership and the talent that it attracts. And today I am honored and thrilled to welcome Daniel Eliot. Daniel is the lead for small business engagement for NIST. And he has agreed to kind of walk us through many things about what he's doing as a relatively new addition to the team. Daniel, welcome to the Safe House.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thrilled to have you. Hey, why don't you acquaint yourself with the audience, a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I've been working in small business cybersecurity since 2014. I have experience. I worked in big industry for a while and then moved and worked in small business for many years and translated that experience working in a small business into a role in economic development and supporting small businesses, helping them start and scale in the state of Delaware. And back in 2014, when this newfangled NIST cybersecurity framework thing was published, we were like, what can we do with this to help small businesses across the region mitigate their cybersecurity risks? And so I applied for a grant from the U.S. Small Business Administration, built out a small business cybersecurity program, really one of the first statewide small business cybersecurity programs in the country. And from there, it just kind of took off. And so I worked at the University of Delaware doing that for quite a while in their Small Business Development Center, and then went and ran a national program at the National Cybersecurity Alliance, supporting small business cybersecurity, and did a little stint at MITRE Corporation in their Center for Securing the Homeland. I was their head of cybersecurity communications at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. And then made my way over to NIST when the opportunity came up to lead their small business cybersecurity program. It felt full circle, really, since I started my small business cybersecurity outreach, modifying or adapting the new cybersecurity framework to the small business community and creating resources for them. And then now I have the privilege of working with that team directly. So it's came full circle here.
Wow, it's a natural evolution. Sounds like it's just like a hand in glove sort of a fit for you. Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
Well, when we first met, you had a real interesting story because you said, Jeff, do you know how NIST started? And I said, I have no idea. Could you share with the audience, because I think it really lays the groundwork for what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, from 1901 to 1988, we were the National Bureau of Standards. So some people might remember us as NBS, or the National Bureau of Standards. But in 1988, with the change in the mission, we were renamed to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. And we're part of the Department of Commerce, and we're non-regulatory. That's always important to emphasize.
Okay.
And we're one of the nation's oldest physical science laboratories, and our roots go well beyond 1901, though. Our mission actually ties back to Article 1 of the Constitution, and Washington's one of his first messages to Congress, where he underscored that uniformity in the currency, weights, and measures of the U.S. is of great importance, particularly as they were building this new country and having to compete with large industrial countries that had more of a presence.
Yeah, interesting.
And so, to give you an example of the way that standards enhance economic security in particular and improve our quality of life, I like to tell the story of the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904. And it really serves as a disastrous example of the need for standards. It was in the morning. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The way they describe it, the fire started and it spread quickly, and it overwhelmed the city of Baltimore's ability to fight the fire. And so fire companies from Philly, where I live, Wilmington, New York, they all rushed in to help with more than enough water and people to fight the flames. But their fire hoses didn't fit the fire hydrants in Baltimore. There wasn't a standard connection. And so ultimately, what happened was the fire burned for more than a day. It destroyed, I think, over 1,500 buildings. Oh, wow. And NIST issued a report afterwards and found that there were over 600 variations in fire hose fittings that existed across the United States.
So every company made a different size connector, basically.
Yeah, to fit their own, to meet the needs of their own unique local community. But that doesn't work on, a national scale or on a global scale. And so we start thinking about this and how it applies to so many other things. Standards are everywhere if you look for them, from our timekeeping to the materials we use to manufacture products and goods, to our public safety, to cybersecurity. And, NIST works collaboratively to promote measurement science, standards, and technology to ensure that the U.S. remains competitive and innovative, not only across the country, but globally. And standards really help to facilitate that innovation and competitiveness and that safety.
And basically the CSF is a framework, which is really more of a flexible structure that helps implement standards. Is that correct? Because you need some flexibility.
You definitely need flexibility. So, not every organization is the same. And so we can't create a checklist, a one-size-fits-all checklist or a one-size-fits-all framework that works for every organization, because they all have different legal, contractual, regulatory environments. They all have different resource constraints. And so you have to have frameworks that are flexible so that organizations can take their own organizational context into account and then adjust the framework, modify the framework to meet their own needs. And that ensures that the framework meets the needs of a larger audience, but also that organizations are able to use it in a way that is the most impactful to their organization.
I think a lot of people have heard about the CSF and things of that nature, and the different the controls. You have the 5 basic controls, and then most recently it came out with a 6th one about govern. So and then along with that, people are like, oh geez, I don't even know if I have the first 5 down. Now I have a 6th one. Have you heard that kind of conversation? And then I think you did something, you took a step and said, I need to make this where we communicate or make it a little easier to digest. Is that part of what you've done thus far with the organization?
Yeah. So I guess you asked 2 questions there. One, I'll address govern. So, people weren't too surprised with govern. It was actually, we issued a request for information. Everything we do is a very public process. And so the community spoke, and, we're recognizing and suggesting that govern play a larger part, because govern was always a part of the cybersecurity framework, like in the identify function, and specifically within CSF 1.1, for instance, there were subcategories for priorities for organizational mission and objectives and activities are established and communicated, right? Understand your legal and regulatory requirements. So those which were originally part of the identify function, have now been moved up into an actual govern function, but they are governance activities. And so it wasn't too big of a surprise or a shift, for instance, for people, I think, to start thinking about governance along with the cybersecurity framework. It really just hones in on the big picture, right? And that's really where you get started with the whole discussion on cybersecurity. And to your second point, you asked kind of a quick start guide or getting started with the cybersecurity framework. You know, a lot of what my role is focused on is not creating there are a lot of small business resources out there, right? There are tons of small business cybersecurity resources out there. My role really is, the way I envision it, is to create on-ramps to NIST guidance. And so when we published the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, I, along with it, published the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 Small Business Quick Start Guide, because what I wanted to do is make sure that small businesses had a primer or an on-ramp to read through this quick start guide and understand what the CSF is all about and what are some kind of key actionable steps they can take. And then, you know, as they scale their business or as they want to mature their cybersecurity risk management strategy, then they go beyond this quick start guide, right? It's in it's just a start. And then move deeper into the cybersecurity framework, move into more of the implementation examples that were released with the new CSF 2.0. And so that guide was really tailored to the small, medium-sized business community. Or I should say it was really tailored to the under-resourced small to medium-sized enterprise, because it's not just for small businesses. Really, it could be used by nonprofits. It could be used by small municipalities or small governments. You know, it's really just for any entity that's under-resourced and needs to understand kind of how to get started with the cybersecurity framework.
Yeah, it's kind of that first step, and then a simple survival kit of sorts.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So how did you construct it? I mean, what went into building out this? Because that came out at the end of February, right? It was published?
Yeah, it was published the same day as the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. And, you know, a lot of thought went into the design as we were drafting the quick start guide. And initially, I just sat down with a blank piece of paper, essentially, and was like, how can I make this actionable? How can I make this so that it's consumable by a non-technical audience? How can I also create a dialogue? I don't want this just to be do this, do this, do this, do this. I want it to be, what are some kind of calls to action? What are some questions that a small business might not be thinking about that they can ask themselves or ask their managed services provider, managed security service provider? I wanted something that was graphic and not full of block text. And so I landed on 4 main components: the actions to consider. Again, we're non-regulatory, so these are just actions to consider is very important. They're just considerations. And also taking into account that every organization is different. Also, the get started section, which is the second section, the discussion questions, which is the third, and then the related resources, which is the fourth. I knew I wanted every function page to have those 4 components. And then I just started writing, and every single page went through multiple revisions, and the entire document went through about 11 different revisions before it was actually published. And it was reviewed. I knew I wanted it to be reviewed by usability experts. And so NIST has cognitive psychologists and behavioral psychologists in our human-centered cybersecurity program. Oh, yeah. And they do a lot of really great work. And so I wanted to get feedback from them to understand how user-friendly it was. I also put the document out to be reviewed by an external audience, by the America's Small Business Development Center, Cybersecurity Council. They're a bunch of small business advisors and small business owners. And so they gave a lot of good feedback on is this too governmenty? Does it make sense to a non-technical cybersecurity person? Is it actionable? And so we got a lot of really great feedback. And I think that's why it's been so positively received, is that it went through many layers to make sure that it's as consumable, as we could make it. And, we even thought about the layout as far as color goes. The usability experts, when I pass it over to them, the draft I gave them, they were like, I don't know where to look. And so we played with color and only introduced color kind of in the actions to consider section, so that it draws the eye from the top of the page over to the colored focus. And then the rest of the sections it doesn't matter where you go after that. But we really wanted to draw attention to that actions to consider section. So that's the only one that has color in its header. And so we just played around with some of that kind of stuff. I'm not a graphic designer, but I wanted to be sure that I did every trick I can to help the reader kind of move through the document in a logical way.
So it sounds, the two things I picked up, extremely usable because it's focused on actions, suggested, or, to consider. Yeah. And it's really for just the layman, so non-technically oriented. It's like, okay, here's things you could do. You don't have to be technical to understand what I just said, and it's brief, it's to the point. That's the one thing I really did like about it, and it's 9 pages, but it just flows so nicely because it's teed up nicely, and it just finishes nicely too. And the aspect about the color, that was fascinating, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the readability, I will say we spent a lot of time thinking through each bullet. Like, are there words in this bullet that we can take out? Right? Shakespeare wrote, "Brevity is the soul of wit," and I have lived my entire career with that mantra. And so I wanted to be sure that, for these busy entrepreneurs, these busy small business owners, they're thinking about more than just cybersecurity risk, right? They're thinking about, can I make payroll next week? They're thinking about if the street in front of my small business, if there's a water main break and they have to close the sidewalk or the street in front of my business. They're thinking about if there's a tornado or fire or flood. And so cybersecurity is just one piece of it. And so what I didn't want to do is create something that is mind-numbing or that is unrealistic or that takes them a long time to understand. I wanted it to be easily, again, I said this earlier, easily consumable and actionable, and straight to the point as much as I can.
Well, the thing about the SafeHouse Initiative, we've got involved in this to make usable information, just basically what you said for your mission, for your Quick Start guide for SMBs. We have the same philosophy. So, we applaud what you're doing. Now, from do you get involved in more internationally oriented type of things? Do you influence international thought? Do you get involved internationally now as part of your extension of your role?
Well, a little bit for me specifically. I mean, the global nature of our economies makes it essential that NIST considers the global context, right, when it determines priorities and conceptualizes approaches to risk management. And so there have been multiple translations and adaptations of the NIST cybersecurity privacy resources as a whole. I think there were 13 different translations of the Cybersecurity Framework 1.1, and I know organizations are working on translations of 2.0. And NIST does participate in and engage with standards developing organizations around the world. And I'll be working with the International Trade Administration, which is another part of Department of Commerce, to develop a webinar here coming up in the next few months on cybersecurity expectations or cybersecurity practices for businesses doing international trade. But my work is mostly not as kind of international. We have staff who are specifically focused on international engagement, and they do the majority of that lift.
Yeah, in our first conversation, you said that you're working on a risk management kind of a guide, similar, the same kind of a concept as what you're doing, what you have done with the CSF. Would you like to talk about that a bit more and where that stands?
Yeah, so the Cybersecurity Framework Quick Start Guide was the first Quick Start Guide. We have many different frameworks at NIST, and so the risk management framework is another one that I'm working on creating a quick start guide for. Again, it's to articulate the key insights, the key steps of the framework, try to help organizations, smaller organizations, understand kind of how to get started with that framework. There's a lot of different vocabulary in the risk management framework that maybe smaller organizations haven't been exposed to. So I'm trying to take a little bit of different approach with that one. And each one's going to be a little different based upon the framework, but trying to highlight different key terminology and break down the different language that's used in that framework. And so I'm hoping it'll be published in the next few months. It's going through all of its quality checks, and because one of the challenges is I want to translate these publications, but I don't want to lose the technical rigor that the cybersecurity and privacy experts put into these publications, right? I want to be respectful of their work, but I also want to be sure that I'm translating their work in a way that is understandable to the small business community. So sometimes, I will start translating it, and it requires a lot of back and forth with the technical experts, because sometimes, I might translate it in a different way or might go in it too far of a direction. And so we have to work on the language. I've never worked in an organization where language is so important, and NIST takes every word so seriously. Yeah. And so, which is wonderful. And so I just want to, that's why we do so many layers of internal reviews. Yeah. We do so many layers of external reviews, public comment periods. We want to be sure when something goes to final that it is right and that is informed by many different perspectives. And so, these quick start guides are very similar in that vein, and that we want to make sure that all the language is right, that we're not diluting anything too much in the guidance, that we're just really highlighting kind of key principles or key points that have been extracted from the document. So I am working on the risk management framework, quick start guide, and hopefully that'll be published soon.
You said something interesting about translation, because risk management, cyber is very specific in its language, but risk management is a much broader across the organization. It cuts across many silos. Are you finding that translation is, when you refer to translation, is it how people view it from where they're sitting in the organization and their responsibilities? Is that how you're talking about translating?
Yeah, it definitely. The perspective of the reader definitely comes into play, right? And so, we're looking with the risk management framework as it's really someone who will be responsible for implementing the risk management framework. And so it really is kind of a primer on before you read the full guidance, here's what it is. And some might be asked to adapt or adopt the risk management framework, and they have no clue, what is this? Because a lot of the cybersecurity framework gets a lot of play, right? But the risk management framework is not as well known, particularly in the small to medium-sized business community in the private sector. And so this document is really a primer on, okay, if I am a chief privacy officer or a chief information officer or a chief risk officer in my organization, maybe my small municipality, or I might be all three of those, which is probably in a small organization the likelihood. If I'm responsible for implementing the cyber or the risk management framework, what is it? What is risk management as a whole? How do cybersecurity and privacy fit into risk management? What are the 7 steps of the risk management framework? And so it really just kind of chips away at this bigger document. Now they will have to read the bigger document, particularly for the risk management framework, to really fully implement it. But it will give them just a good foundation as they think about implementing, or as they are directed to implement it.
So it could be a good starter kit. I mean, once it's out, start with that, then go to your quick start guide for cyber, and then move from there. That kind of a building block is then they'd have a kind of a wider range of knowledge and say, okay, perspective is wider than just the cyber portion. I'm now looking at a much wider conversation. Let's narrow it down to the C. So they kind of fit together like a Russian doll.
Yeah. I mean, you have. And our frameworks, are all interreferenced to one another, right? So the cybersecurity framework is referenced within the risk management framework, as is the privacy framework. And so they do talk to each other, and they're all mapped to each other. And so, it's a great place to start thinking about risk management as a whole. And then you want to think about cybersecurity risk management and your privacy management. And so all of it they're related.
Yeah, I think these guys are going to be, breaths of fresh air, was what I would say, because, we NIST is big and it has a lot. And if you go there, it's intimidating. So to have a guy like you saying, hey, wait, let's just kind of get a bite size. Let's get a on-ramp here. This is your toehold. Here's what you can do, and here's what you can do with it, is extremely refreshing and so needed in the marketplace. So, that's, tip of the hat to you there.
Thank you. And, one of the exciting things about my job is that I get to connect the dots across NIST. And so, we have many small business resources that, that were created before I started working at NIST. And so I'm trying to, and we have just a lot of small business efforts, right? We have the manufacturing extension partnerships that I'm, trying to shine a spotlight on. We have our small business innovation research grants that I'm shining a spotlight on. I'm just trying to connect all the small business related dots. I'm even connecting the dots when it comes to how to do business with NIST, right? If I'm doing a presentation to small business advisors, a lot of times they have procurement fairs, and I want to get NIST involved in those procurement fairs so small businesses know how to do business with us. So even beyond the core focus of how do I best connect small businesses and their supportive ecosystem to our guidance and our subject matter expertise and resources, it's also how do I connect them to broader NIST? How do I talk about all of the small business things that we have going on? And how do I communicate who NIST is and what our mission is within the Department of Commerce? And so it's an exciting role. And again, all of it is focused on supporting our nation's small business community and making sure they're resilient.
It sounds like your vision for your role is to be like the Sherpa, the first ever Sherpa for NIST.
I like to think so. I mean, engagement is in my title, right? And so, I want to be sure that I'm engaging small businesses in every part of NIST, because NIST is such a cool agency. There are so many parts of NIST that small businesses can engage with. Businesses of all sizes can engage with. Yeah. And so I just want to be sure that I'm connecting them with all the opportunities to work with NIST.
So if you had to leave, because we always ask our guests if they have, leave one thing that our audience can do today, if they could just do one actionable item, what would that be if you had one thing to say to them?
Well, I'll speak to two audiences, right? I'm a communications professional, so I always have to think of audience first, right? So for those of the audience who are technologists, cybersecurity experts, privacy experts, whoever you are, the small businesses in the community where you live need your help. Give back. Go out and do a cybersecurity or privacy best practices talk at your local library, at your chamber of commerce, at your small business development center. Build those partnerships. Help, because those small business owners are your neighbors. They go to your church. They go to your clubs. They are your friends, your family. So I would say, give back to the small business community. They need you. They need the support. They don't have in-house cybersecurity expertise. You don't have to become their in-house cybersecurity expertise, but share your knowledge with your local community. That's for your technical audience. I would say for your non-technical audience, enable multi-factor authentication. That'll be my my non-technical audience kind of ask or call to action.
Well, Daniel, it's been a delight with this conversation, and very enlightening also. NIST is richer to have you there as their spokesperson, as the first ever Sherpa. And we look forward to seeing many helpful guidances from you in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be on the call. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you and your audience. It's been fun.
Daniel, thank you so much. And Daniel, Eliot, thank you ever so much for all the contributions you've made to the SafeHouse Initiative. That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the SafeHouse Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information on the SafeHouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen. Send us an email at safehouseinitiative.org@gmail.com or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.